focus on jobs. So,
Thank you for talking.
absolutely.
Well, thank you. This is.
Well, we'll reach out. Barbara Hall said, well, you can't go.
We need to.
He got back
Absolutely.
tonight to report.
That's great. Thank you.
I wonder if you could all get that last cup of coffee, or perhaps the first cup of coffee in some cases. Well, I want to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm particularly impressed that we have such a crowd on what is clearly a very drizzly day. But I think today's program will bring a ray of sunshine about the future, at least. My name's Kent Hughes. I run a program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center on America and the global economy. I want to give you, for those of you who are new to the center, let me just say a word or two about the center itself. The Woodrow Wilson Center is a living memorial. It was founded in 1968 as a living memorial tribute to our 28th president. Wilson was the only president to have earned a PhD, and he often commented that the policy analyst, the student of policy, and the policymaker were really engaged in complementary and parallel efforts. So the assignment that the Congress gave us was to do our absolute best to bring together the people who were doing the best thinking about policy together with the people who are really making policy. And sometimes, of course, they're the same, in Wilson's tradition, the same person. Here at the center, we have a new CEO and president, former Congresswoman Jane Harman, who defines the word dynamo, I must say. And she is moving us to what she refers to as Wilson Center 3.0. And we're going to be pursuing three broad themes under her leadership. The kind of transnational challenge, which range from everything from stable supply chains to the reality of transnational crime. What do we think about the rising powers? We hear a lot about the BRICS, but really, it's really now the BRICS and beyond. And third, what about the challenges to America as really still a leading global power? And one of those challenges, of course, is long-term competitiveness of the U.S. economy, which in no small measure depends on education and training and retraining and a kind of workforce that really is ready to seize the opportunities of the 21st century. We look at these challenges that our new CEO has laid down for us, and we're going to draw on the work of a series of programs here that really cover every part of the world. And then there are a number of cross-cutting programs like my own that look at everything from climate change to global finance. Over the course of a year, we'll have 150 fellows and scholars who come here, some for a few months, some actually for an academic year. And their common effort has been to focus on policy, and increasingly going forward, they will complement these three broad themes that Jane Harman has laid out for us. Well, today, we are delighted to have our second joint effort with the National Center on Women in Technology. Lucy, I must say, is someone else who defines the word dynamo. We have coming up a series of panels that are going to explore these different paths to the 21st century skills that will serve individual Americans and the country as a whole. Let me turn it over now to Lucy to add her welcome to mine.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right? With your permission, I'd like to just sit here because I have a few slides to show, and I can't see them if I stand up from behind the podium because it's right here on the laptop. So I hope that's just fine. I would also like to welcome you on behalf of NC WIT. We have as a mission the tough task, I think, but very important task of increasing women's participation in computing. And we have as funders the National Science Foundation, and I just want to say a special thank you to Peter Freeman, who's here, who was at the National Science Foundation, who got this work started. And we have a lot to say about 21st century workforce skills. And so very happy to have this dialogue today. I hope we get a lot of good ideas and observations. I think that there's no clear, straight path to a solution. And so all of your best thinking, we hope to compile at the end of this and make some sense from it, and perhaps come up with some recommendations. So with that, let's get to it. I brought a chart which I thought was pretty interesting, and I'm sure you can't read it completely. This is why I wanted to sit down here and not stand behind the podium. This is a pretty interesting chart that was in the June issue of Wired magazine. How many of you read Wired? Oh, okay, well, that's good. They actually use some data from LinkedIn, and if you think about the data that LinkedIn knows, they know a lot. And what they did was they looked at the last 5 years, 7 million people who had made job switches. And this chart shows the sectors, or what they describe to be what they were shifting into. So if you look at them, you see things like wireless, internet, railroad manufacturing, medical device manufacturing, biotech, okay, computer networking and graphic design and other things. And so these sectors are really growing, and it's a whole new type of workforce that's emerging or that needs to emerge in this country based on where we're headed. So these jobs are what Wired calls smart jobs. And I kind of like that phrase in some ways, because it's not quite the same as STEM, although I think here in DC we would tend to call it STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. There's a new report out from the Department of Commerce that shows, in fact, that a large number of the large percentage of the STEM workforce today has at least a 2-year degree. So you think about it, we've got shifting into these sectors. Some of them have been very traditional sectors, manufacturing, oil and gas, et cetera, and they need these types of smart skills. And yet, 40% of the non-STEM workers today have a high school education or less. So I just saw something in InfoWorld where they said that this is a capabilities mismatch. Our emerging workforce and the educational system that we have today that is really excellent and sort of on the global stage is also not necessarily going to meet this type of skill set that we need. And it's all the way from entry-level skills through the creation of new technology. So let's look at the computing sector for a minute. These stats should alarm you. Well, these won't alarm you. These won't surprise you maybe. But this is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So you can see that, in fact, out of 1.4 million jobs that they are predicting, that we will only have about 30% from our current degrees. And this is the one that I find upsetting, and I wanted to show you so you would be upset with me. This comes from the ACM report running on empty. And you can see that 2/3 of our states today teach what we would consider in computing to be literacy. Word processing, the use of very basic office tools, instead of fluency. And when you also look at the number of states, 9, that actually allow these types of classes to be counted as requirements for graduation, it's pretty shocking. It's going the wrong way at a time when the skills of our workforce need to go the other way, especially at the high school level. So I would assert today, like if we're going to make bold statements, that every high school student needs access to rigorous computing in high school before they leave high school. They need access to a rigorous computing curriculum in high school. And we need to make it inclusive. As you can see, young women are not participating, nor are underrepresented groups. So with that, I want to just give you 2 parting slides on this. We at NC WIT have been trying hard, along with a lot of our partners like ACM and CRA and the Computer Science Teachers Association, to put tools in people's hands so that they can look at this at a local level. Because it's often hard to get your hands around these things if you're looking at it from a US level or even by state. So we have, over the last year, gotten a number of different data sets and put it together. It's online at EdJobs Map on our site, where you can look by U.S. House District at the educational preparation in that House District, be it who's taking the AP computer science test or 2-year degrees all the way through PhDs, and compare it to the number of IT jobs that are predicted for that U.S. House District. And there are business cards out on the table and also executive reports so that you can take it away and figure out what this data might mean. But we think it helps you find local indicators so that you can look where you live and really understand the situation. So this is Virginia District 10. So what happens is you scroll over the map and you keep enlarging it and keep enlarging it, and you can find your U.S. House District. And you see that red bar? Those are the number of IT jobs predicted U.S. House District. And you can see, do you see any degrees at all? No. I mean, it's really pretty minimal, the degree preparation within that House district. So these data have all kinds of limitations. Obviously, not everybody who goes to school in district works in the district and vice versa, and people move around. But when you start to aggregate it and take it up to a state level and really look across, the different indicators, you start to see the problem a real way. And so, with that, I turn it back to Kent, who will introduce Congressman Petri. Welcome.
Thank you, Lucy, and welcome, Congressman. Our President and CEO, Jane Harman, had very much hoped to be here and introduce the Congressman. The inevitable has happened, and she got pulled away. So she sends her apologies, but also asked me to add her greetings to all of you. Well, it's a great pleasure to introduce Congressman Petri. That's the good news of Jane Harman not being able to do this. Tom and I were actually law school classmates, but he is considerably more successful than I am, as you can see. You have a short bio in your collected set of bios, but it doesn't really begin to do him justice. He has been elected and re-elected from the great state of Wisconsin since 1979, I believe. He has a very rich record of public service that goes beyond his years in the Congress. He served in the Peace Corps and with USAID in Somalia, which is now a very troubled country, of course. He's a founder of the Ripon Society. He's the author, editor, or co-author of quite a number of volumes, which to me makes him a kind of Woodrow Wilson figure, both politician and scholar at the same time. He has been recognized for his frugal approach to fiscal policy, as well as being a real champion of small business. He currently serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Education and Workforce Committee. In education, he is a leader on two key subcommittees of the Education and Workforce Committee, both early childhood through K-12 and then higher education. So he's one of those individuals that really has an overview, a systemic view of where we are and where we need to be with regard to education. Congressman, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Let me turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, well, one of the things we don't put on that bio website is I was actually a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in 75 and 76, back when Jim Billington ran it, and Dick Darman shared an office, as so did a number of other people. Elliot Richardson, General Goodpaster was here, George Kennan. So I was certainly not among that distinguished group in any way, but it was really a wonderful opportunity to meet people.
Good to have you back.
Thank you. And the castle they were finally evicted from, and now here they're in these digs. They struggled bureaucratically for years to avoid that from happening. But anyway, I'm kind of have to confess that I'm personally somewhat technically challenged. I think many people of a certain age are, and so I think anything I say needs to be taken with a grain of salt. We may even demonstrate that at the end of my remarks, because we have, as the icing on the cake, if you will, or at least as something, a little video that was prepared about what's being done in the area I represent at the high school level to revamp and reorganize technical education. I thought I would just start by sort of telling you a little bit about where I come from in all this, being on the Education Committee. Being from Wisconsin, I'd always thought that we're cheeseheads, we're America's dairy land. We proudly claim we have more lakes than Minnesota with fish in them and all that. But it turns out, if you look at the data from the most recent census, which is, of course, a great snapshot of our country, Wisconsin's the #1 manufacturing state in the United States today by a percentage of people with jobs in manufacturing. And the area I represent is by far and away the #1 manufacturing district in the state of Wisconsin. So being not too mathematically savvy, I would say that makes my district #1 in manufacturing. If Wisconsin #1 and I'm #1 in Wisconsin, and the staff said that doesn't necessarily follow, and they checked. And we're the 4th most So we're in the top 1% of the 435 congressional districts. About 90,000 people work in manufacturing. There is a district in Texas, and I think one or two in Indiana, that are a little more intensive, though their states are not as intensive in manufacturing. Indiana is actually second to Wisconsin. We're not number one in because we're a medium-sized state, but we are in percentage of people in the workforce working in manufacturing. Why did that happen? It's not really an accident. We don't have a lot of natural advantages in a sense. We're not by a major seaport and being able to easily ship to the world and so on. So we're in the very center of the continent, so we're kind of logistically challenged in a sense. But for 100 years, Wisconsin has had a very close partnership between the world of education and the world of manufacturing, and has taken that very, very seriously. So that our state vocational education system's comprehensive, covers everyone in the state. Everyone is mailed a catalog a couple times a year and can enroll in many courses for $1 if they wish. And the board of each regional vocational center is made up of CEOs from local companies, as well as union representatives and people from agriculture. And they work hand in glove with the local employers to satisfy their needs for skilled employees. So as an example, I just, on Monday, day before yesterday, spent the better part of the day visiting the Beaver Dam branch of the Fox Valley Technical College. This is the region where I live. It has 3 local campuses, one in Beaver Dam, one in Fond du Lac, and one in West Bend. And what I saw when I visited the one in Beaver Dam was a facility where a gentleman who had started out on the production line at Mercury Outboard Motors, which is a world-class manufacturer, and then had gone back for some further technical training, was identified as a very able individual by his instructor, and was asked, he was getting the extra training because at Mercury, the 3 shifts, the ideal thing is to be on the day shift, not one of the 2 night shifts, but it takes 20 or 30 years seniority to get there. And so he was having a young family, and he thought, well, if he got additional training, he could find a different job or figure out something he could do during the day instead of having to work the night shift. And he ended up running a center at this technical college that trains technicians from all over the United States and around the world to maintain and service Mercury Outboard Motors, stern drives, this kind of thing. We have another center, technical school in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, in partnership with Caterpillar, that has an arrangement where the students can actually live in the dorms of the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, so they have the college experience, but they're going to the vocational school and learning to become technicians to maintain the diesel engines and so on and so forth that Caterpillar manufactures. They have a real shortage of that, so Caterpillar is willing to help with the tuition, and if the people they're not required, but if they go work for them, they'll help them with the paying for it over first couple of years of their employment. So these are the kind of partnerships that exist. Another thing going on when I visited on Monday was you go outside and you see these people with their spurs on climbing telephone poles and things. Those people don't just happen. They have to be trained, and a partnership of the utilities in our region provides the equipment and so on, and the individuals go out and learn how to deal with high-powered electricity, which is not you don't want to make a mistake. And those jobs that I'm discussing are all well-paying jobs and very much in demand. And this is the story in our region, people are lining up employers are lining up to find employees is something called welding, which is tough work. And the gentleman who was a welder is training other welders to be professionals and so on. And talking to him, what's the pay? How does it work? Well, starting welder is somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, and if you are serious about it and keep on working and improving your skills, that's $100,000 a year to be a welder or more, because there is tremendous demand for people who get it right the first time and are very reliable, and they're welding on these pipelines and a variety of other very key and very expensive industrial applications, and it's worth the money for the people involved not to fool around, but to get someone who knows what they're doing. So right now we have this huge mismatch. It's not just in the United States, but globally, between the needs of a rapidly transforming manufacturing and business sector where technology is permeating and changing the way employment works, and the skills or lack of skills of the population. I visit a lot of schools in my districts and spend a day from morning till night seeing how they wrestle with the changes that are confronting K through 12 education. And at one at Kimberly, Wisconsin, just outside of Appleton, the principal and head of the superintendent, after the visit, took me aside and said, well, you know, we couldn't say this publicly, but we used to be, if we could educate 20% of our students to be functionally literate, and the rest to show up on time and follow directions and work as a group, they could all get pretty good jobs. And now we've got to educate 80% as best we can to be functionally literate, and because they are and to work with people of differing skill levels, which was a revelation to me. But in the modern world of work, the person on the factory floor is often in communications electronically with the customer in some other country even, because the companies are trying to eliminate layer after layer of paperwork and bureaucracy and just sort of get it right the first time and put people who are doing things in touch with those that they need to deal with. And so, I mean, companies are way ahead of government, and let alone the international diplomatic community when it comes to eliminating all these and squeezing out these costs. But the result is that there's almost no place to hide. And so you need to have skills and be productive to function and survive in that environment. And if you do, the sky's the limit. The jobs that didn't exist 20 years ago. Grease monkeys used to be looked down upon. You were like the blacksmith. If you couldn't do anything else, you'd go down and work at a local gas station, taking care of cars. Now they are diagnostic technicians. They've got to deal with computers and all the things, and they start out in my area $30,000 to $50,000 a year, and it goes on up from there. But those jobs didn't exist 20 years ago. So anyway, I would think that a lot of this to really work is going to, and it's really on the back is as much on the business sector as it is on the government sector, is for them to, and for us in the government sector to accommodate this and to help it and maybe facilitate it, but to work with local education resources to make sure that they are actually focused on the needs that they have. And those needs are shifting. In our vocational system, companies can make arrangements when they get new equipment or decide to get into a new business to immediately have a special course at the vocational school to train them. The vocational school will even send instructors and trainers over to the factory to train the workers on premise. So it's a hidden subsidy that we've got to help our companies be more competitive. What gets in the way of that working effectively are well-meaning regulations, sometimes out of this city, that require approvals or super decisions that take 6 months or a year to make, and out there in the competitive world, they don't have the world isn't going to stop. That company is not going to be able to use that program. We'll have to work around it. The effort to be helpful will be thwarted, and it will basically involve a lot of wasted resources if there is a delay and this sort of well-meaning interference. One of the biggest things that schools are now trying to do, I mentioned this, it might be of interest in the Kimberly district. They've grown from 350 students to about 1,500 students at their high school in the last 5 or 6 years because it's in a rapidly growing suburban environment. Having a first-rate school system is a key component of that because families moving into the area want their kids to get a good education experience, so everyone in the community is pushing to make sure that this school is as good as it can be. They have about 50 different student clubs, everywhere from archery to skeet shooting and arrow. They even have a skateboarding club. And the philosophy of the school is if a student wants to have some activity, if they're willing to take the time to write up a serious proposal, they'll give it serious consideration and try to get to yes. And the reason for it that underlines all of that is that if a young person can find some constructive activity that they're interested in and that turns them on, that's something you can build on in all kinds of other areas. And in the vocational field, they are using art and the welding classes and other classes together. So kids not only learn welding, but they do sculpture and do ceramics and other things that so they can understand. To do that artistic thing, you have to act well. You actually have to have some skills and know how to do something that is also useful in the world of work. So they try to emphasize that and make those facilities available before class, during a lunch hour, after school, so kids can work on projects outside of class hours if they're interested and turned on by it. So that's about it. I had all kinds of facts and figures about how our vocational system works and surveys, but I can tell you this: the one thing that was very interested to me is that when you survey employers as to what they value, it turns out that there's a big difference between those who are globally competitive and those aren't in terms of how much time they spend on in-service training for their employees, how much they value employee involvement, how much importance they place on the individual worker and the like. And all those things are recipes for success, and ignoring those things are recipes for mediocrity in the workplace. So what we've brought is a little video presentation which had the shows a industrial arts class in Brillion, Wisconsin. And let me tell you a little bit about Brillion, Wisconsin. It's the only Brillion in the world. How it got named Brillion, I don't know. I have another city in my district called Marquezan, which is the only Marquezan in the world. They had that one, I know, it had a city name that was similar to one in another part of Wisconsin. The post office said, this is creating too much confusion. You're going to have to change your name back 100 years ago. So they had a contest, and the local haberdasher won. He had read something in a gazette about the discovery of the Marquesa Islands in the South Pacific that were supposedly a heavenly place. And he said, well, where we live is heavenly. So he sort of anglicized Marquesa to Marquezan, and that's how that town got its name. But in any event, in Brillion, Wisconsin, there is it's a town of maybe 3,000 people. And the local The Brilliant Foundry is the big tradition. We're number one in foundry production in Wisconsin now in the United States, interestingly enough. The Brilliant Foundry is a big local company. It was owned by the Ahrens family, but they went bankrupt during the Great Depression, as many other people did. And then their accountant, a man named Peters, took over running the Brilliant Foundry. The Ahrens family had no money and nothing to do, but they did have entrepreneurial spirit, and they developed, one of them in their garage, a little a rototiller, and borrowed some money against their insurance and got some additional money from relatives, and with $3,000 or $4,000 set up making rototillers, and now they're in the fourth generation of that business. And it has grown to having 1,600 employees, headquartered in Brilliant, Wisconsin. They have various brands. You may have heard of Gravely is one of them. They're very competitive in making equipment for golf courses and corporate lawns, and the snow blowers are their forte. They sell those in Scandinavia and all over the world. The company has nearly went broke again about 10 years ago, and decided that if they were going to succeed, they were going to have to really get everyone involved and get into some of these Kanban and continuous improvement and so on. And they've taken it very, very seriously, reorganized even the way the factory and offices are located so that the meeting rooms are available not just to the executives but to the employees, and there's a glass wall between the factory floor and where the meetings are so everyone can see who's there and what's going on. And they're really working on involvement and continuous improvement. And they've had thousands of changes in their production designed to improve quality and squeeze costs out of the system. It's a major commitment. And as part of that, Mrs. Ahrens, the mother of the guy who now is in charge of it, for many years was chairman of the school board in this little town of Brilliant. And the kids grew up in this little town and went to the public schools and so on, which is the way, not off to Andover or something like that. And they really thought it would be worthwhile to partner with several other companies in our region and try to reinvent what was called SHOP, and to make it modern. So it came really from the companies, looking at what they were doing. And by the way, one other thing, the head of the Ahrens Company serves on a nonprofit medical board, along with Paul O'Neill, who's our Treasury Secretary, and others, headed by a guy named John Toussaint, who ran Theta Care, which grew out of Kimberly-Clark, which is a regional healthcare provider. And they take doctors and administrators from Theta Care over to the Ahrens factory because they've discovered that the snow blowers and so on are better taken care of than the patients because of the fact that healthcare tends to be kind of a cottage industry, and they don't really work on a lot of procedures. I mean, when you get on an airplane, they have a checklist. Regardless of whether it's a clear day or not, they got to check everything off. And they really are trying to force doctors to wash your hands and taking pictures even to make sure because they pretend and this sort of thing. And then people die. So just these simple little things. One other thing, the guy John Toussaint told me that when he was running Theta Care, the fourth time they operated on the wrong leg, they closed down all the operating rooms and made them switch over these procedures. Anyway, there's tremendous resistance in healthcare. We talk about the government programs and all this, but to really get at how we're going to have to improve the delivery system and squeeze out a lot of costs, because everyone knows 15 or 20% of GNP on healthcare when Singapore is spending 5%. Something's wrong with that picture. They live as long or longer than we do. So there's a huge amount of money that's squeezing out education investment and everything else that's being probably not as effectively used in the healthcare sector as it could be. It's not really more money. It's managing the process better and figuring out how to do it effectively. And a lot can be learned from what's happened in the private manufacturing sector over the last 20 years as they face the threat of international competition and have had to squeeze out costs and do some counterintuitive things like eliminating inventories and all that costs, and with their continuous improvement programs and accountability programs. But in any event, the family worked with local employers to rebuild SHOP, as it was called, to make it more in line with the way the modern workplace works and what people would experience when they got into the world of work. It's really not, it's a continuous work in process. But nowadays, I still can remember 30 years ago visiting a foundry, and it was tough, dirty work, really bad, shocking in a sense, a lot of physical labor. Nowadays, at least the ones that have long runs, like the Neenah Foundry, it's all automated, it's air conditioned. These guys who used to be running stuff are sitting up, and women are sitting up in air conditioned. It's like a bottling factory. It's what it reminds me, running out castings. And you can go to Hershey, Pennsylvania, near here, and see there's no one working making hugs and kisses. Everyone is working tending the machines, and that requires a different skill set. And there's no way the Chinese can make hugs and kisses and fold these things by hand and compete with that factory up there. So that's the future. But to do that, we need to have people who are productive, and the jobs are there right now, and the employers are looking for them. But there is a mismatch between the skills and interests of many people in our society and what the marketplace currently demands. To close that, this will show a little bit of what is being done in one small town in Wisconsin. We showed this a year ago. The Swiss, of all people, had a conference here in Washington at this very building on apprenticeship and raising the skills of people globally. Of course, we all know what Swiss watches and the fine machines that the Germans and Northern Italians, that region of the world, make. They saw this thing going on in Brillion, Wisconsin, and thought, actually, we're competitive in this one region. So I think if we can make it run, you can get some idea of some of the ideas that are actually being done right now.
Schools, communities, and businesses are coming together in new ways, developing unique collaborations, fostering teamwork and ingenuity, inspiring young minds to new possibilities, taking ideas from the classroom and fueling the local economy. Together, it's a new blueprint designing Wisconsin's future.
This program was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Exploring aerodynamics.
I drew this little dome for the cockpit area.
Growing plants without soil.
And that this is probably the future of any type of farming.
Or building a high-mileage vehicle from scratch. This is definitely not your father's shop class.
Nothing like shop class when we were in high school. This is incredible. We're a small little community here in Brillion, and to have a facility like this, that's really a cool thing.
The air goes around it and it doesn't go back here.
About 6 years ago, we changed our technology education program at Brillion High School. We felt it was necessary to move into the 21st century. We were still doing some things that were a bit, we thought, old-fashioned. And as we started to develop relationships with businesses in town, especially with errands, we had an idea. Could we maybe expand our program and expand the facility? And when we approached errands with that, they were very excited about it, willing to jump on board, and that's kind of how we got here.
Aaron's company is a local manufacturer of lawn and snow products. The company jumped on board with a $1.5 million donation toward a new technology and engineering addition to the school. But it wasn't just the building that changed. Instead of an emphasis on what the students make, here it's all about the process.
We want to create innovative thinkers and doers, and we want to create young people who have a very broad range of knowledge because we don't necessarily know what they're going to go into, and at the same time, technology-related jobs are changing so quickly that young people have to know how to adapt.
I saw a statistic that our kids that are in school right now will have at least 10 to 14 different jobs in their lifetimes. And if they're going to have different jobs, they're going to have to adapt. And to adapt, they're going to have to learn to be creative. They're going to have to learn new skills all the time.
I'm going to go be an auto technician. I mean, even though I'm at the top of my class, people look down upon that, but I figured this way. Cars are getting more and more advanced. Why not get smarter people to work on them so then people want to know why something went wrong? I can tell you. I know enough science and math to be like, okay, this is what's wrong, this is why.
Problem solving. Like, we ran into a lot of problems, and instead of, oh my gosh, how do we fix this? We kind of sat down and, okay, well, we can do it this way, we can do it this way, or we can do it this way. And then we kind of took everybody's best interests and opinions and put it into one.
No matter what career you're in anymore, if you can, you're going to be using technology, and oftentimes we want young people to think like engineers, not necessarily become an engineer, but use the design and problem-solving process like engineers do every day. Two of our stars last year were two females. These two young females are now going to school, to college, for a nursing degree. And I definitely want my nurse, if I ever get sick, to be a problem solver.
Problem solving is key to the High Mileage Vehicle Program, an innovative class where students can take their talents out for a spin. For last year's first all-female team, it was about more than just making a nice-looking car.
We accomplished something that I never thought we would. Like, the day it was done, we're like, wow, we actually built this, and I never thought in a million years that I would have built a car like this.
And not only are they learning, this year they're leading.
I'm so happy to be here to teach the girls all the things that we learned last year, because last year it was the males teaching us just about everything, from the size of a nut and a bolt to how to weld. Like, we're the ones that get to teach that this year, and that's a really good feeling, to know that you're teaching somebody something else that they could use forever in their life.
Now this small school with big ideas is setting an example for schools across Wisconsin.
A lot of places are coming to find out how we're doing that, how we're getting the industry to be involved in our schools. So it's not just a local thing, it's really a statewide thing where people are going, wow, a small community like Brillion can have that great interaction with their business and industry and schools. Maybe we can do it too.
A great interaction between businesses and schools. For the Aaron's Company, it means more than a monetary donation. It means hands-on involvement.
I would encourage any business to go ahead and see what they can do to help out their local high schools or tech schools, technical colleges, or even four-year colleges where they can get involved. And it doesn't have to be a huge expense. Obviously, the Aaron's Company putting the money into this building is a big expense, but a lot of what we've also done is simply our time. And that's rather easy to do. When you start putting a little bit of pressure on there, it automatically releases one of the tires. So I would really encourage any business in the state of Wisconsin to make that contact with the local high school and find out, brainstorm, talk about ways that they can go and help. And I think just in doing that may open up some eyes to, what can be done.
The Aaron's Company is a very sophisticated company when it comes to thinking into the future and promoting change and intellectual curiosity. And we would like to think that at Brillion High School we try to do the same. And so we couldn't do it without them. It's just a wonderful partnership. And it's absolutely amazing. Once Aaron's Company, which is such a respected company, became involved, many other companies also jumped in and became involved. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't get a call from some type of major company saying, how can we be a part of this excitement? So I definitely think that if other schools and communities can get this rolling, the snowball just gets bigger and bigger.
Schools, communities, and businesses are
So that's what we're doing out in the real world, as we call it. And just one small footnote, I was just a month ago they just opened a big new research facility at the Aaron's company itself. This year in the bad economy, they're growing 23%. And adding employees and are very profitable, and they are trying to hire people and not being able to find people. And also Schneider Trucking, big global. You see they have 600 positions available right now for people that they can't fill. Those are tough jobs because it involves over-the-road trucking. It's not for everyone. But there are company after company that are looking for, we claim in our state right now there are over 30,000 jobs looking for that are unfilled, but there are not people with the skills that are required. And it's not that they're low-paying jobs necessarily either. So we really do, it's not the whole solution to our problems, but it's clearly we're not going to be moving forward effectively as a country if we don't do a better job of engaging young people with the opportunities that are really out there. And of course we owe it to ourselves as a country to not only provide them with that opportunity, but also we'll all benefit if we have a skilled workforce that's globally competitive and can build a high standard of living on that foundation. So anyway, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Congressman, very much. I think clearly NC WIT is part of the answer to just the challenge that Wisconsin and the rest of the country has. And looking at Brilliant and thinking of a GDP perspective, we can see that Wisconsin's going from brilliant to billions. I think that's part of the future. Well, let me call up our first panel, if I may. It's a very distinguished group. Got your umbrella, but yes, please. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and she in turn will introduce the rest of the panel. Avis Yates Rivers is the moderator and brings a great deal of experience and quite a distinguished background. She is currently the president and CEO of Technology Concepts Group International, and they provide information technology solutions, project and program management, and a whole host of very valuable services. She previously was a senior executive with ExxonMobil and brings all that experience as well. And she has, in addition to a good deal of experience, she has graduate management training from 3 different distinguished institutions, including, I'm sure were the congressman still here, he'd be pleased to hear that one of the 3 is the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Davis, let me turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, we're about to kick it into another gear. I'm delighted to be here and to serve as the moderator of this first very distinguished panel. As you've heard, I'm Avis Yates Rivers, and hopefully you have picked up the bio book from the front table, because I think these individuals have, men too, have so much important information to tell us that I'm just going to give you a brief little snippet of who they are and what they're going to be talking about this morning, and then I am going to moderate a discussion. Our first panel is going to take a broad view on why information technology and computing science is such an important part of STEM. We hear often in the media and on the Hill how science and math is so vitally important, and it is, but so is computing science and technology as a whole. So we want to talk about why it is so important from a broad perspective this morning. And we also want to talk about the challenges and successes in finding talent. I'll talk a little bit about that from the perspective of an emerging company. I like that better than a small business, right? An emerging company. And then we have two corporate sitting CIOs on this panel, and we'll hear from them as well as two other distinguished gentlemen. So let me tell you who they are and what we will be talking about this morning. To my immediate left is Donna Herlihy, and he is our current Senior Vice President and CIO at Avon Products. He leads an information technology organization of 1,500 IT professionals, and he's responsible for IT strategy and operations globally. And he's based in New York City. And Donna will be talking about why does the U.S. need a skilled IT workforce despite globalization and offshoring, some trends we've heard of for a very long time. The range of IT skills a CIO looks for in candidates, and what he is currently seeing as he searches for talents. After Donna, we'll hear from Anthony Carnevale, who is currently serving as the research professor and director of the Georgetown University Center of Education and the Workforce. And Mr. Carnevale we want to know from you, has the recession impacted jobs in the IT sector and how? And then 21st century job skills, what are they? How many qualified youth are lost in the K-12 pipeline? After Mr. Carnevale, we will hear from Mr. Cordell Carter. And Mr. Carter is the Director of Public Policy at the Business Roundtable. He leads their Education, Innovation, and Workforce Initiative. And Mr. Carter will tie education to innovation and the workforce. What CEOs are thinking more broadly is a discussion that we want him to deal with this morning. And last but not least is my associate on the NC WIT board, Mr. Dan Zellum. Dan is the Senior Vice President and Chief of Business Technology at Medco Health Solutions in New Jersey. Dan and I both came down from New Jersey. He is responsible for information technology strategy and ongoing operations of the company's vast technology assets. And we want Dan to just reinforce the message about computing and IT as an important part of STEM and how women and minorities, underrepresented minorities, are extremely absent in IT at all levels. Okay, and then we also, this is something that Dan has taken a leadership role in, talking about the sorry state of K-12 computing education in the U.S. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit from a smaller business perspective, because the challenges that the larger businesses face are amplified for smaller businesses such as mine. Why is computing science so important? And it's because of the fact that technology has made such tremendous contributions to our domestic economy. Computing has become so ubiquitous. There's nothing we can do in our lives today that computing is not a part of. So, the technology sector is driving innovation constantly. And we see that with all of the important innovations that have come out in recent years. I am from the sect of, I guess I'm going to date myself here, but it's a small room. I trust y'all. My corporate career began when, by the way, it was just Exxon, not ExxonMobil. It was just Exxon. And I had the pleasure of marketing technology on Wall Street that was pre-PC. You know, it was pretty easy when the PCs were introduced. Y'all know what year that was, so we're not going to even talk about that. It was pretty easy to knock off PCs at the time because we were selling information processors and how, you know, right now it was and how you couldn't live without it. And I sold the first fax machines on the market and a lot of other what we thought was pretty important inventions at the time. And look how far we've come. That's what this is what technology has done for the world. We also know that securing our cyber infrastructure, protecting our national security, and making our energy infrastructure more efficient all depend on computing. But despite all of this, the pipeline for supplying the necessary talent, as we know, is shrinking, and the interest at the K-12 level is falling. The outlook for IT-related jobs remains very strong, despite the tough and challenging economic recessions that we've been having and living through. So we're driving innovation and basically changing lives. The individuals that we look for and that are part of this sector are more educated, as you've heard, and they enjoy higher earnings. And so that leads me to the challenges of identifying talent from the perspective of a small business owner. I remember when I was at Exxon and being involved with a lot of corporations. Most of my customer set is Fortune 100 corporations, where we lease a lot of their technology from the data center to the desktop and provide other vital services. And I see how they put a lot of resources into smart recruiting and onboarding activities. You know, they send out teams of recruiters to select colleges and universities to attract the talent before someone else does. And smaller companies just doesn't have the resources to do the same thing. And so we have to find ways to do that more efficiently. And we do that with the use of technology. But the resources are certainly more limited with smaller companies. And secondly, employees need to be so multidimensional in a smaller environment. You know, when someone comes in and asks, well, who's responsible for sales? All of us. It doesn't matter what the job description is, which, by the way, they are blurred. You know, you have to have the ability to come in, be problem solvers, as we've heard. It's not enough to just be a good tech anymore. And we provide tech services, so it's important to have that skill. But you have to also be able to talk to the customers and develop a sense of trust and dependence on, you know, knowing that whatever problems they have, you're there to solve them and you won't leave until they're solved. So there's such a multidimensional aspect when you work for a small company. We don't have the luxury to have a hard and fast job description. And I think that is relevant in larger companies also in today's world, but even more so when you're smaller. Thirdly, we can't compete necessarily head-to-head with corporations who can offer more vibrant, let me say, work environments or healthier compensation packages or more robust benefits packages. You know, knowing that there's a dearth of qualified candidate, it's definitely a buyer's or an employee's market, right? And they can decide, let me see, do I want to work for TCGI in Somerset, New Jersey, or Facebook in Palo Alto? Let me see. Let me make that decision. You know, it's a real choice that they have, and so that makes it that much more challenging to attract employees. We also need to be able to stay relevant and to generate, as a small business, enough clients and interesting projects to attract this talent. So it's not all doom and gloom. I'm currently looking for an IT manager, so maybe before I leave Washington, that job will be filled. It's not all doom and gloom when it comes to finding the technologies, and we've been successful in working with local schools, either state schools like Rutgers, who have MBA interns that are available for summer work, or working with local technical schools like DeVry, who is just a few miles away from us, who we've hired many graduating technicians from, and who knows us. So we come to know these placement people. And they, whenever they have a crop of students graduating, they will contact us and ask us what our needs are. And so we have a little, as a smaller entity, we have a little closer relationship with some of the more local schools that the larger organizations may not be sending recruiting teams to. And so that has been successful for us. So I want to just end my remarks there and say that we all know what the issues are in identifying and preparing a 21st century workforce. And as a proud member of the NCWIT Board of Directors for 5 years, I can see that the needle has begun to move as a result of Lucy and her staff and the board's active passion and involvement in being focused on this issue. And we can use everyone's help. And we invite you, if you have not looked at NCWIT and don't know what we're about and trying to accomplish, please do so. There's a lot of information out on the table, and the website is just full of good information. So that's my NCWIT commercial, and I'm going to now turn the conversation to Mr. Dunner-Herlihy as he discusses for us why does the U.S. need a skilled IT workforce and what he looks for as a CIO. Please welcome him.
Morning, everyone. Is it okay if I sit down, or would you prefer me to stand? Sit. Okay. Well, you know, I'm sitting here thinking it's a little ironic that we've got an Irish guy talking about why the U.S. needs a technology workforce, but that's the globalization of the 21st century. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm humbled because I think I've learned more from just thinking about this topic and reading some of the material that Lucy and the NCWIT people sent out before the meeting, and then listening to the congressman than I'll probably impart in terms of insights to you. But what I'll offer is, you know, as a practicing business and technology leader, I'll offer you just kind of a personal story, and then the story of Avon and what we wrestle with, and hopefully you'll get some insights from that, and it's just grounded and practical. You know, I grew up in Ireland and I studied in Dublin. Most of my family is still back home in Ireland, although I have an American wife and 2 American boys up in New York. And when I think about, I studied industrial engineering, and, you know, I was one of those kids, as many are at the age of 15, 16, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. In Ireland, the way the education system works, you actually need to make the decision then, because it's not common to go and do a liberal arts degree and take a few years to find yourself and then find your passion. You go straight to your subject of choice. And, you know, back in the mid-'80s when you know, I was in the university system in Ireland, you had to choose. And so I went to a guidance counselor. I went to my high school guidance counselor, and, you know, he gave me some aptitude tests, and he saw my scores. And, you know, I was one of those people, I wasn't great at anything and I wasn't terrible at anything. So he said, you should be an engineer. And, you know, back in Ireland, and it's something I've observed that I think is a little different over in the U.S. Back in Ireland, you know, the professions that were held in the highest esteem were probably, if you ask my mom, she would have said the priesthood. But after that, it was medicine, it was engineering, it was architecture. And oddly enough, which is very different to many countries and certainly the U.S., you know, the law, the liberal arts, the business studies, accounting were actually held in lower esteem and were easier to get into. So the smart kids went to medicine and engineering, and the other kids went to, which I think is a little bit of a reverse. And that's one question I have for, I guess, all of us when we look at this growing crisis in terms of technology skills is, why is it that our society values, you know, some disciplines that are less under crisis differently? What is it about us as parents? What is it about us as a society? How do we brand these things? How do we put the PR and the marketing behind them so that kids get excited about engineering or technology or those fields which I think we really need, as you've said, you know, in the reading, half of our economic growth has been driven by the sciences and technology, and then it's clear that it'll be a greater proportion going forward. So that's a puzzle for me. I don't know what the answer is, but it is an observation of the differences. I ended up in the U.S. Thanks for your kind welcome 11 years ago. I ended up here in Boston working for the Gillette Company, and then I moved to Chicago. I became the CIO of the Wrigley Company about 11 years ago, and ended up in Avon in New York about 3 years ago. And Avon is 125 years old this year. I'm privileged that one of our board members, Paula Stern, happens to be in the room this morning. And if I don't, do you justice, Paula, I can always go back and take my welding qualifications and do a decent job. Avon is the company for women. We're very proud that our CEO and chairman is a woman. We have a number of powerful female board members. We have 5 female members of our executive committee. As you would expect for a company that serves 6.5 million Avon representatives around the world, we have a large female workforce. In my IT group, I have about a 30% female representation, which it's not outstanding, it's not enough, but it's something that is probably better than the norm. But in Avon, 125 years old, and yet the area we invest most in now from a capital and an expense perspective is technology, because it is ubiquitous, as Ava said, to serve 6.5 million individuals and then the hundreds of millions of customers that they serve. You can't meet that volume and complexity without a very, very comprehensive technology infrastructure, be it on the e-commerce or mobile computing and so forth. So, we as a IT organization, 1/3 of our IT organization is in the US, 2/3 is overseas. Which isn't bad, actually, because 82% of our business is overseas. So we skew our IT organization into the U.S., and the reason we do, and we need to do that, is to innovate with technology. You've really got to put the architect of the business model, the business policy, the business design, that person who operates that area of the business, together with somebody who's very savvy in terms of the technology, to architect the technology. You can pass off the development, and many of us do pass off the development or the testing work, if you like, the actual construction work of technology to either captive lower-cost centers. We have a captive center, which means we own the center and we employ the people. We have one in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. We've got one in the Philippines. But we've also offshored 500 jobs, I'll be candid, to Indian outsource firms, and we've needed to, partially because of economics, but more because we need the surge capacity. We need to be able to get the talent quickly when there is a business program that has a significant payback, and we need to move fast. We just can't hire the people quickly enough, and so some of those jobs would be in the U.S. if we had the talent. I can guarantee that. That, by the way, in terms of the global, and I know Dan probably does similar things, or maybe he doesn't, but as a fellow CIO, I don't know what his observation would be, but of the 500 people we have in India in the outsourced, offshored arena, we get about 200 to 250 people's worth of productivity, because it is very, very difficult to get the productivity when you're working remotely, when you're working across different cultures, different time zones. That is extremely difficult. So we're not really doing it for the economics. We're more doing it because of the ability for those vendors, big firms like Infosys and Cognizant that we use, to actually staff up quickly in a way that we can't in this economy. we have a major transformation program, and I'll just pick on one. We've several, but we have a major program relating to a business model change, e-commerce, mobile commerce, and a back-end infrastructure on SAP. And the reason I mention it is just as an anecdote, an example of the issues we face. We have a team of about 100 people in White Plains, New York, working on the program. We are adding 50 people right now. I have 50 vacancies for SAP practitioners and about another 20 for e-commerce. And I started looking in June and I filled 10. So we are seriously talent constrained. At our meeting, our governance meeting about that program on Tuesday, our biggest issue in that program right now is filling those openings. If we don't fill those openings, that program will actually, ironically, go over budget because the burn rate of the team is about $1 million a week. But if I haven't got all the staff, I'm burning it without building the capabilities. So it's a major, major issue for us on a micro level. So, you know, what do we do about it? I got into my first job in the UK. There was no engineering work in Ireland because the Celtic Tiger hadn't started when I left university. So my career guidance counsellor didn't do me the greatest favour. But I went to the UK and I went to work as an engineer in the automotive industry. But the way I got into industry was through a scheme called the Teaching Company Associates, which was a kind of public-private partnership between government, universities, and then I would say mid-sized to large employers. And the idea was, you know, engineers, and I think this is true also of IT professionals, don't come out ready to hit the ground running when they leave university. They lack business skills. And I'm talking about things like time management of yourself, project management, the ability to relate in a business setting in terms of either written or verbal communication, and so forth. So, and just some basic experiences. And so the Teaching Company scheme was a scheme where raw graduates like me were brought in. We were backed by a university. We were given a mentor who was a university professor. We were paired with a company and given a project of meaning, and then through the guidance of a mentor in the company and the university staff and some fairly intensive training over about an 18-month period, we did the project at low cost. So, I mean, I think some of these companies thought they were just getting cheap labor. What they actually got was a lot of innovation because they had a young kid who was getting a lot of backing and a lot of support and mentorship, you know, from a university system that brought innovation. And, you know, I'm proud that we brought innovation into that program. I did look it up online this morning coming here. I think the Teaching Company scheme ended in 1989, so the UK no longer funds it. But some sort of a scheme. I'm hungry for you know, an influx of talent, but the talent needs to hit the ground running. Because I can't, honestly, unlike a GE or some of the bigger organizations, I don't have, in our organization, as lean as it is, I don't have the luxury to spend a year or two training people straight out of college. It's only for the very operational positions that we can do that. So some sort of scheme of that nature, you know, just rebranding what we are and what we're about. It's really about innovation. It's really calling it computer science even turns me off. So, you know, I think it's the wrong brand for what we do. Is something I think we should be doing. The PR that we saw from the congressman, you know, why isn't this issue on 60 Minutes? It's a big issue. People are worried about their kids and their kids' future. I tell my kids they should be bankers because everyone I live with in Rye, New York is in Wall Street. Why am I telling them that? I'm overly influenced by the society. So we need to do more in terms of the PR aspect of the story. And then on the flip side, I think we still need to accept that we are global and it will be right to bring people in from overseas to fill some of these positions. It is better to have them doing the work here and paying tax to the US than having them doing the work overseas and paying the taxes somewhere else. So that for me is also a part of the picture. And the main thing we should talk about this morning is, we need our fair share of women. If we had our fair share of women, that gap would close pretty quickly. So thanks for that. I hope that was helpful, and I'll pass back to Davis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very helpful. Next up is Dr. Carnevale, who will talk to us about the recession and the impact that that's had on us. Welcome him.
Your presentation, I'm going to say the same thing you did, only I'm going to do it. You've already said what needs to be said, but I haven't said it yet, so
You have it.
You're more qualified.
One of the ways to think about this, that is, it's hard to talk about anything now without talking about the current recession, where we are and where we're headed. One of the distinctive traits of this recession, which is very much like the last two recessions, the two prior recessions, is that it looks as if all the data indicates that structural change, that is fundamental change in the economy, is accelerating. What is new and different about that, and you can get some arguments about this, but the arguments are only at the margin, and that is, what is new and different is that structural change appears to be moving faster in recessions now than it does in growth periods. That stands, at least in my day, economic thinking, a bit on its head. In the old days, let's say the 80s, which is really when all this began to change dramatically. When you had a recession, maybe 35% of the people who lost their jobs went back to the same job, worked with the same people, same building, same technology, etc. Those numbers in the last three recessions have gravitated towards low single digits. So, and the most striking characteristic of the shift is that when the recession is done, the jobs that are gone and not coming back tend to be high school educated and jobs that require only a high school education or less. So we get a sorting process in recessions that moves the economy more and more towards a higher skill base and higher skill requirements at entry. And that is the depth and length of this recession has made that true in almost an extreme way, I think, this time around. We'll see. We face another several years of recovery, which is to say slow growth and relatively high unemployment. I think the consensus is rapidly congealing on that, and probably won't be out of this one until 2017, 2018, by which time we'll hit, depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, somewhere between 5.5% and 6% unemployment as the bottom line new normal in our employment rates. And what is striking about that is it brings back something that we experienced in the 70s, which is structural unemployment. That is, a lot of the reasons, a number of Americans, a substantial share, and they're geographically concentrated, and they're concentrated among men, but the most severe condition, that is the most at-risk people, even though they are not as many of them that are men, are women. They're the ones who will suffer the most in terms of earnings and long-term earnings prospects. So we're in the midst of something that in many ways is going on underneath the economy we read about in the paper every day, and it's happening very rapidly. The other point I want to make is that there does appear to be, and this is kind of, at least for someone like me, this is kind of counterintuitive, there is a mismatch out there. We know that we're getting 3 to 4 million job openings on a steady basis in the United States, should be 8 to 10. Hopefully in 2018 that'll be the case. But when we look at those job openings and the duration that those job openings stay open, and the duration of unemployment by the characteristics of the unemployed, we see a mismatch. And the mismatch is a skills mismatch. so that even though there are lots of people, 4 or 5 people for every job opening out there, down from 8 or 9, I think, or 7 or 8 at the worst of this, there are enough people in line. They just don't have the right skills for the jobs that are opening up, which is a rather seemingly self-inflicted wound on our part in terms of, that is, we have opportunities, we can't deliver on them for people. I think the other point about this, to talk specifically about STEM for a second, is that STEM is about 5% of the American workforce. Takes it to 6 or 7 million jobs, I think, at the moment. Most of those jobs are computer-related. Computers, so to speak, are the largest share of STEM jobs. They are the fastest growing. STEM itself is growing very fast. It's grown consistently now for over 20 years and is actually the second fastest growing set of occupations as against healthcare in the American economy, at least. And I think that fact alone, that is the result, the effect of all that is the end is that STEM wages remain relatively high. That is, STEM wages are not declining the way wages in other occupations are declining in recession. And it also means there's a debate among economists as to whether we're producing too many STEM workers or not enough. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of that debate, but it's one that I can't escape. In the end, the resolution of that has been that, in fact, if you count the number of people in the United States with, almost no matter how you count it, with high math skills in high school is one way to count. Another way to count is people who go into STEM programs in post-secondary institutions where the vast majority of STEM workers come from. This is not a high school set of occupations. If you count those numbers and run them against the actual job openings, looks like when we do our projections, it's a rough fit. We come out with a shortage less than 1 million, though, which, given the size of our numbers, is not huge. Other people come out with a slight surplus. Some people come out with a very large surplus because they count all the STEM qualified people in the economy. So you get some people that say there are 4 or 5 qualified people per job. This seemingly confounding set of facts, one, STEM wages are going up, and the way you measure the demands for something in economic terms is the wages. And when wages are rising, it means employers are bidding for something. They want more of it. They would not pay higher wages if they didn't need to. I know that's unkind, but it's nonetheless true. Welcome to capitalism. The rising STEM wages confound the data that says we got too many STEM workers. It doesn't make any sense. Turns out the intervening variable here, so to speak, the thing that makes those two sets of pieces of information allows them to make sense, is that there is an enormous diversion of STEM talent and STEM workers in the United States. That is, we tend to produce, every economy has its top 5% of students. In the United States, our top 5% are as good as anybody's top 5%. We were relatively awful when you get to the middle, and there really is no education system that produces any economic gains for people who come out in the bottom of our test score distribution. That is, the truth is they might as well not go to high school. They make rational decisions in many cases. So that in the end, what you see in the United States is a share of our students and then of our trained workers, including trained computer and technical professionals, who are in a sense amply supplied, but they don't end up in technical roles. The reason they don't looks to be twofold. One is that there are higher wages elsewhere. If you can do math in America, you'd almost, from an economic point of view, you'd be crazy to be a chemist because you can get much higher earnings in certain segments of healthcare, professional and business services, and in a variety of other occupational clusters. You can make more money. and you don't have to stay in the lab on Saturday when everybody else is at the football game. It's easier, I think, is the blunt way to say that, to get the MBA and make the money. The other thing that happens is that there's diversion in the labor market itself, which is really very strong. That is, STEM people don't stay STEM long. In occupational terms, they become managers, marketing people. They become the boss. And in any open market system, being the boss is really the way you make money. That's the bottom line. So the technical skill is only rewarded up to a point. In the American labor market, probably the most reliable pathway is to get a STEM education and then to work at it for a few years in a STEM-like job, and then to transfer into management as quickly as you can. The bump you get from the STEM education is very high. These are the highest paying majors in our colleges. That is, the highest paying BA is that of a petroleum engineer. They, on average, over a 45-year career, make $120,000 a year. Somebody who goes to college, gets a BA, and becomes a high school counselor, on average, makes $30,000 a year. There are huge differences. And if you get a graduate degree in STEM, and apart from engineers, the vast majority of STEM people do get graduate degrees, almost 80% in some STEM occupations, you increase your earnings power again by another 30 or 40%. And you have the flexibility to move into non-technical roles. It turns out that the technical base in STEM degrees is much like we think of liberal arts. It gives you lots of options all along the way. And arguably, although I don't say this too loudly, it really gives you more options than liberal arts does. So that there is a problem here. In the end, the only answer for this is to produce more STEM talent. Because the other thing that's going on, the reason there's so much diversion, is the demand for STEM talent is growing in other parts of the economy and in other occupations. So a technology base or a technical learning has high value as a base career, as a base skill set elsewhere. Finally, one last point, and that is all this with respect to women and minorities is good news and bad news. The bad news is that even if women and minorities get the same degrees, work the same number of hours once they go to work, they don't make as much as men in STEM. But the good news in STEM is they get a lot closer than in any other occupational cluster. That is, the differences between male, female, minority, majority earnings are much closer in STEM. Why? Don't really know. And in the case of Asians, incidentally, Asians out-earn white males. This is where Asians are essentially the elite in the American workforce.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Cordell Carter, the Director of Public Policy Business Roundtable. And at the beginning, I was going to invite you to write your questions down because I'm sure this conversation is going to stimulate a lot of them in your mind. But we may be doing that during coffee and discussion at the break because it's difficult to end these conversations in a few minutes. So please feel free to continue them at the break. Mr. Carter.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
You all have the coffee, I don't. So good morning, everyone. Great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Like Ms. Yates-Rivers, Avis said, I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Business Roundtable. I have two committees. One is Education Workforce, which includes innovation. We just had a name change. The other, as of a couple weeks ago, is Information Technology. I should say information and technology, there is a difference. We just submitted a cybersecurity report, which is my reason for having the tip out at 10:30 because we're socializing it on the Hill. So I do have to run, but I would love to follow up with anyone about anything we say from the CEO perspective, which is what I've been asked to bring. So last week, the Business Roundtable and Harvard University sponsored a Innovation and Jobs Roundtable at Bloomberg. And this was a brainchild of Dr. Faust from Harvard and Governor Engler, who runs the Business Roundtable. They want to get a group of CEOs and a group of university presidents together to talk about innovation and jobs. So, we did the backgrounders and everything, but when we got to 3 hours of discussion on immigration policy and basic research and STEM skills and intellectual property protection, there is no daylight between the two groups. I mean, if you close your eyes, you wouldn't have known who was saying what, which organizations they represented. It was very, very clear from that discussion that innovation is a key to economic growth, and economic growth means jobs. So at a very high level, that certainly is a CEO perspective. There are others in this room from different companies that can artfully express their current demands for STEM workers. But at the highest level, CEOs see STEM skills and information technology skills as integral to their continued existence as private enterprises. Well, there are a lot of public policies that increase or inhibit the likelihood of innovation. Ultimately, it comes down to talent. Talent is something that I talk about quite a bit. I'm not the typical lobbyist. I never worked on the Hill. I hadn't been in D.C. for the previous 8 years. I was in public ed. I was in climate change law. I was doing a lot of different things after leaving IBM here. But in all the different organizations that I've been a part of, talent is it. I mean, everything is a human capital business at the end of the day. And without that key input, you don't have the output that your shareholders demand. So I believe it's fair to say that the countries and the companies that really focus on developing, retaining, and frankly training their people are the ones that are going to be the leaders in innovation. I mean, it is the natural output from those inputs. So the CEO members of the roundtable just want to make sure they're able to hire the best and the brightest. Of course, we go after foreign talent. Especially those that are studying STEM in our universities here. It just doesn't make sense to let people get this subsidized education at our great universities, leave the country, and then compete with us a couple years from now. No, it makes more sense to, of course, furnish and burnish the domestic supply of STEM skills. But the reality is, it's a quarter-by-quarter business, and for many companies that aren't private. So they have to compete for the best and brightest. And it is a global talent war now. I mean, these are multinationals. They're competing everywhere for talent. And you'll see in many org charts that your global HR manager is now reporting directly to the CEO because they're starting to understand that without the talent, nothing else really matters. We're not going to get where we want. I want to talk about U.S. News and World Report data. I love Brian Kelly. I don't know if you all know Brian Kelly from U.S. News. And we have breakfast maybe once every couple of weeks, and we talk about a lot of different things. And I love to tease him about his rankings of the universities. But, I was preparing a governor to speak at Making Science Cool, a STEM summit they did at the National Press Club a couple weeks ago, and the governor gave the keynote conversation. So we're talking about these rankings just amongst ourselves, and we're looking through it. And so I wanted to point out some things about our very best universities and our best students. Okay, so the U.S. News ranks schools in the top 10 across 3 categories. They have the top 10 national universities, top 10 public universities, and top 10 liberal arts colleges. So obviously, and this is my caveat, there are a lot of bright students who attend these schools, and a lot of great institutions are not in the top 10. So this isn't an exclusive list. This is just how the methodology worked for those particular schools. So with that caveat, where would you all think the STEM is among the most popular major for these top students? We're looking at 31 schools. Let me tell you what it is. So 11 of the top 31, so that's more than a third, had zero STEM majors among the top 5 choices for students. Okay, 20 of the 31 included STEM among the 5 most popular majors, but that's primarily biological sciences, kids going toward medical school. So only 9 of the top-ranked colleges and universities had the physical sciences, engineering, math, or technology among the most popular majors. This is what we classically think of as STEM. And I would also put, because I saw Cameron here, computer science. That's not there as well. So clearly, other than biological sciences, STEM is not attracting the top students. Ms. Sanders spoke about a capability shortage or a capability mismatch. I would also say there's an attitudinal mismatch onto your conversation earlier. Our top students just aren't choosing these majors that everyone knows. All the data points to, as Dr. Cannavale says, will lead to an enhanced income for the run of their career. They're just not choosing that. So I don't know what's the rub. I don't know how we change that conversation, if it's just an extensive media campaign for the next generation, but something is just not clicking with our very top students at our top universities. So at every point in a American student's educational experience, this is getting to kind of the barriers to STEM. The supply, or I should say the potential supply of STEM talent is reduced. So if you think of the transitions from pre-K to third grade, from third grade to sixth grade, from all of middle school, eighth grade on to high school and then the university, you're losing potential students that could study STEM at each of those transition points. So the research is clear on when and how STEM and IT workforce decreases. It loses women. It loses underrepresented minorities. And if we're honest, it's the majority of students that they lose because math. If you don't have math ability at a certain point, I don't know if it's 8th grade, 6th grade, you math folks know, there's your potential to study and be successful in STEM at a university level, at any higher learning facility, is dramatically reduced. So if you're asking for one recommendation from CEOs, don't lose the focus on math. I look at Jim Goodnight, who is a personal hero of mine. He's the founder of the SAS Institute, and I visited his facility in Cary, North Carolina, last month. And I don't know if anybody ever been to SAS Institute in North Carolina? You walk the grounds of this palatial place. You see how happy the people are as they walk with their softball equipment at 11 o'clock, and they're prepared to stay all night. And then you see the spa that's on campus, and you look at what they do and the market penetration they have. Every analytic software you can think of that runs Amazon, that runs all these different, that's SAS. And what is SAS? It's an algorithm. It's the house that math built. So let's not lose the focus on math. Thank you.
And now to wrap it all up for us, Mr. Dan Zellum, CIO, Medco Health.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Well, based on the comments of my esteemed gentlemen around me, I feel like I'm the perfect petri dish because I was one of those guys who took advantage of a liberal arts education because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I ended up getting my degree in economics. But along the way, I took math. And in getting to math, I got to computer science through math. And I found my passion. And my passion ended up being creating value, which is an economic principle, with a technology principle in computer science. And that put me on a career, over a 30-year career in technology, starting as a programmer for Chemical Bank Corporation way back when. And I was also one of those people who very quickly rose to management and has benefited me as well in my career. So I can personally attest to what you gentlemen have pointed out, particularly the mathematics. I have to say, as a father, I'm proud to say I've negotiated one of my sons to take a mathematics degree. So he's a junior right now in that. I haven't gotten to computer science yet, but I'm working on it. But, for me in STEM, you talk about science, technology, engineering, and math. For me, I think the thing that brings together computer science, I agree, is math, because of the algorithmic and computational thinking. I think it's a perfect match for the two, and they really complement each other. And I've really always focused for that, and the people I look for, the people that have math backgrounds, my experience says those are the ones that really, really do well in this field. So, Medco is a Fortune 50 company. We're a healthcare company. For those, many of you may be customers of ours. We're really not a consumer brand name. We're more of a B2B company. But we're in the pharmacy business. We manage chronic conditions, things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, through our home delivery platform. We're also connected to every major retail pharmacy in the country. So we're a huge claim processor as well. And technology is what we do. It drives the business. In the clinical things we do, in our automated pharmacies that dispense over 1 million prescriptions a week in a factory-like setting. So it's systemic to what we do. And it's a critical part of innovation. Medco is a company about innovation and delivering value. It's at the heart of what we do, clinical value, economic value, and technology is behind that. So we have a rather large demand for technologists. I have a staff of about 3,000 people right now that range from virtually every technology you could think of. So, you know, and we're fairly well represented in that in terms of our makeup, but it's still largely a white male population. So one of the things we really focus on, and particularly, is bringing up women to the technical ranks. I mean, try and find yourself today a Unix Unix administrator. Very hard. A woman or female network engineer. Very difficult. We also find it very difficult in the architectural ranks. And I think, you know, to kind of add on to what the gentleman said, is that I think offshoring, we have kind of done a disservice to ourselves because we have told our children that computer jobs are dead. They're going to be offshored. And I can, you know, reinforce what you said, that it's just not the case. Yes, maybe some of the commodity type things make sense to move offshore, but when it comes to the intellectual capital, I know in Medco, and I heard it at Avon, that we want to keep onshore. And that's what we build around, and that's what we look for, the people with those skills every day. And they're hard to find. They're, you know, particularly people with the high-end technical skills that build upon that algorithmic and computational thinking. It's built on that foundation, and you can get that out of a computer science program. So, you know, as I transition then to, you know, you look at the educational system, I think that whole offshore concept has hurt us there as well in the early ranks. I think that when it comes to education, it's focused on literacy. It's not focused on the core principles and building upon them throughout a student's career. And that's a problem. And I think when it comes to women, you know, there's a silent bias in towards, you know, steering them away from computer science or mathematics. That also drains the pool a bit, if you will, as kids transition through high school. So I'm very active. You know, I'm on the NC board. Within Medco, we have a Women in Technology forum that I have a group of women that chair, and I'm very active with them. And you know, the things we are doing in the communities and visiting local schools to start to talk to kids and bring female executives with me that can talk to students about what we do, and it isn't just playing video games, right? Which is really what, you know, a lot of kids associate today with computing, right? That's the extent of their knowledge and depth in computing, and it's, as we all know, it's way, way, way beyond that, and it touches every discipline, again, for what we do in Medco. So I think it's something we as a country have to take seriously. We have to do more about promoting it. The government needs to do more about making awareness, about helping us with getting formal education in the K-12 program, you know, like there are for the other STEM disciplines. I think these are things we can do, and you know, as a person who's with a Fortune 50 company, it's critical to our long-term success. I don't know how to put it any plainer than that. So I appreciate the time this morning, and certainly happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Well, I hope you found this dialogue engaging and interesting. I hope that you continue it with the panelists who will be here, hopefully, for a little part, except for Mr. Carter, who has to go to the Hill. We understand that. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Carnevale, Cordell Carter, Dan Zellum, and Donna Herlihy this morning. I am not going to open up the floor for questions because we really do need to end this session so we can begin the others on time. But I thank you for your attention. It was my pleasure serving as your moderator this morning.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah,
Same here.
you use
There is a break until 11,
Yes.
and I also
Yes.
just wanted to tell Dan that I was the first Unix system administrator west of the Mississippi River, and that was a
We
real
have a job
long
for
time
you.
ago.
So do we.
We'll
The
see you
war
again
for
at 11.
time.
Thank you.
You guys are Franklin Lake.
10:40 I'm sorry, 10:45.
Nobody's coming back.
No one's coming back till 11.
Where do you live in New York?
I just want to say with utter respect, I'm Edie Fraser, and I'm doing that website called STEM Connection. Remember? So, and we would love if we could do the jobs call, but we're going to do just a conference call on the 20th. So I think you know some of the people